So officially, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. I see people from a variety of countries, so that's very exciting. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Yael Shapira. I'm Olam's Director of Network Engagement and Programs, based in Washington, D.C. And I'm really excited to welcome you to today's Olam Aspire webinar. For those of you who have not ever been to an Aspire webinar, or it's been a while, and that's mainly because the last time we did this was a year ago, but we're excited to be back with this series. I'm going to start by sharing information about the program, and then we will dive into our speakers and some conversation about this topic. So a bit about Aspire. Aspire is our program around ethical practices in international development and humanitarian aid and global service. And Olam started this program because we believe that no matter how long you've worked in the field, how much knowledge you have about international development, there's always room for growth and for learning and understanding how to do your work in the most impactful way, and how to do less harm when you're working with different communities and different environments. So Olam is a holistic program that offers various aspects that could help organizations. So we offer webinars and workshops such as this. If you go to our website, this is our Aspire page. You could see recordings of previous webinars from various years about all types of topics. So you're always welcome to watch that, do a watch party with your colleagues and talk about different ethical aspects of your work. We offer Aspire microgrants for Olam's partner organizations up to $1,500. So it can be used to, for example, bring in a consultant to review your website around ethical practices, ethical communications, or to come in and consult you on how to ethically close your next program. Or it can be used to bring your team together and get some food and have team meetings around these important topics. We also have resources from around the world that already exist out there. Olam is not here to reinvent the wheel, so we offer various tools and resources, written videos, etc., that other people have already created and put out there around ethical practices. And finally, we have our ethical practice, best practice spectrums, where we focus on 5 topics, including ethical communications, community engagement, monitoring and evaluation, climate practices, and ethical global volunteering. And each spectrum has 10 commandments, which are basically the 10 key guidelines for ethical best practices in these topics. So, for example, one of our 10 commandments, which you can find in our ethical community engagement spectrum, is around genuinely promoting locally led development, which relates somewhat to our topic today, because one good reason to close an international development program is if you want to kind of pass on the ownership to your local partners and to a local community. So this is a spectrum, for example, that shows what it looks like for an organization to just begin on this journey. So organization that is kind of top down and does not involve the community in their design and implementation of projects. And then as the organization moves along the spectrum, where a leading organization really works hand in hand with community and really understanding their local context, needs, and opportunities, including when closing a program, so doing it in partnership. So all that you can find on our website, and I will shortly put Olam's Aspire link in the chat. So now on to the topic of our webinar, how to close international development programs or projects in an ethical way. So as you all probably know, 2025 will go into history as the year with the most international development programs being closed. Definitely the most by far. So the abrupt closure of USAID and major foreign aid cuts earlier this year caused thousands of staff, both at USAID, at the implementing partner NGOs and local organizations who were dependent on that funding, to close, and staff were fired. And contracts were terminated, grant money was pulled, and millions of program beneficiaries globally had to quickly adjust to a new life where they weren't getting the critical support that they were dependent on. So there's been a lot of heartache and a lot of endings this past year. And also, on a different note, the war in Israel has resulted in Israeli organizations having to close their programs due to reduced funding and also shift in prioritizing the humanitarian situation in Israel rather than helping populations abroad. So, particularly in Olam's network, we have seen a lot of closures, both from the USAID um, side and the Israel war side. So, I am sorry if some of you have experienced some of that closure. And so now that the storm has calmed down a bit, we want to take some time to examine and explore what it looks like to close an international development program with the best practices in mind and without doing any harm or doing the least harm possible. So that our organizations are prepared for future unexpected circumstances, which hopefully we won't see anytime soon. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce our speakers for today. We have Natasha Shi, former Vice President of International Development at Dexis Consulting Group. And Natasha is going to give a larger overview from her personal experience on how to close programs, both in normal times and with what she's experienced in the past few months since USAID closed down. And then we have Yuval Barda Minor, Project Manager of Engineers Without Borders Israel, one of Olam's partners, who will share a case study from her own experience of having to close pretty single-handedly the 10 program, which was also a partner organization. So it's really great to have you all. With that, I'm going to pass it on to Natasha. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? All right. Great. Well, thank you. I'm Natasha Shi, and I'm so glad to be here with you today. I've been working in international development for the last 25 years and was most recently the Vice President of the International Development Programs and was very much a USAID implementer. And we were operating in 11 countries at the time of our closures, essentially. 2025 really presented us with some unique challenges in terms of how we go about closing our programs in an ethical manner. And so, really happy to be talking today about some of these challenges. So, why talk about program closures in the first place? The reality is that funding is going away, and that there's lots of different circumstances why we might have program closures. Um, Ideally, there are planned transitions. Programs are not meant to be lasting forever, and we have been focusing on having sustainable programs that are very much implemented locally. And there also may be an issue where some programs may not be effective and that we need to close down programs. Obviously, this year we've seen not only bilateral agencies, but multilateral assistance worldwide that is going away. And so, with funding shortages, programs are closing. And there's also circumstances where activities have to be rescoped. And so you can see challenges where there are changes in political environment on the funding side, as well as in the country where you are operating, that are, essentially asking us to change our activities. So, when we think about, project closeout, we really have to think about project design first. And in the ideal, we're preparing for closeout during project design when we are thinking about what we are doing for this project. We're planning out for what are the types of activities that need to happen at closeout and budgeting for those activities because those activities do not come without costs, right? We have an idea of what the outcomes are going to be. What is the objective of the program, but what can actually be accomplished during this particular time period. And thirdly, I think something that is really important that I'm not sure that all programs really take into account is determining whether this activity is meant to continue after the project. Is there supposed to be someone taking over? Is this supposed to be a time-limited activity? How is this activity supposed to continue? Really understanding like what is the goal here in terms of the continuation of the activity. And then I talk about disposition of assets, equipment. In any project, you're buying things, you're acquiring things, and we need to be able to decide, what we're doing with that equipment and those assets that are acquired during the scope of the project. And then finally, really thinking about staff transition. If you have a project that you're designing, it may be 2 years, it may be 3 months. If you've hired staff, what is supposed to be happening with the staff? What are you legally mandated to do? And have you made a plan for how you're going to transition that staff? So there's some very practical aspects of a project closeout. And this starts with really a clear understanding um, between everyone that is involved um, about what is supposed to be happening. And there are a lot of people, right, that are involved in a project closeout. Um, there are legal entities, bank accounts, there's financial closures that need to happen. Oftentimes in the countries where we are working, there are audit requirements. I don't think I can overemphasize some of the legal things that need to be handled in a project closure. Um, I've talked before a bit about managing the staff departures. In larger projects with many staff, not everyone, hopefully, is leaving at the same time. And so, what does that mean in terms of trying to stagger the staff departures so that it is least disruptive to the program? And that importantly, there is some kind of handover procedure, which is very much related to the knowledge management aspect of of a project closure, really capturing all of the implicit and explicit knowledge that has been developed over the project, doing any kind of evaluation of the activities and any final reporting that might be required for the grant. Um, I talk oftentimes about, we acquire a lot of things during these projects and you need to be able to dispose of them. But how do we dispose of them, right? There's first of all the like environmental aspect of things, let's say you've acquired equipment, 20 computers, like what are you doing with those 20 computers? And making sure that are they going to another entity, some local grantees, do they need to be recycled? Being responsible financially in terms of what you are giving to others to have to take over, and being able to do that in a sustainable fashion. And then I think the most important part in terms of a project closeout is transitioning these activities and really figuring out what is going to be transitioning and who are you working with. And this is something that starts very early on, but gets very messy, towards the end of a project. And I'll talk a bit about what happens when you have to close down very quickly. There's local actors. You may be working directly with the government, or you may only be working with civil society organizations, but somehow you have to be transitioning those activities. So I want to talk a bit about how can we close ethically? And in my mind, there's really like three main buckets that you have to think about. I think the first one is, I would say, kind of like the obvious one, is honoring financial obligations. And I think depending on the maturity of an organization, how large of an organization you have, how many activities you have, there are a lot of financial obligations. Everything from needing to pay staff to, the last electricity bill for an office. Making sure that if you have grantee payments, that every single last payment is being made, consultants, there's a very long list of financial obligations, and oftentimes we're not planning for everything that could potentially come down the line and making sure that everything is settled. The second bucket that I want to talk about is really how do we maintain relationships with stakeholders? And, when we are closing out, it's often an emotional time, regardless of how you are closing down a project. It's the end of something. And there are a lot of people involved, whether it's a communities that you're working with, you have staff that have given, a lot of their time and efforts and, blood and sweat into a project. There are grantees. There are people who've been vendors in your project, and everyone is impacted by this closure. And really making sure that you're taking care of honoring all of those relationships is really key. And then, the third bucket that I wanted to talk about is, how can we achieve a sustainable outcome? And are we thinking about the activities beyond the life of this project? Have we planned for this? And if we haven't planned for it, what can we do about it now? Um, Thinking about who was doing the work and who is going to be doing the work going forward. And also thinking a bit about when is it time to actually close a project? We sometimes think of closing a project, okay, it's because the funding was for a 3-year project, so that's when we're going to close. But sometimes it's time to close the project before that. And it could be because the activity isn't really working. The counter, whether it's your counterparts, whether it's local organizations, it's not a good fit. There's all sorts of other reasons why you might think about closing. And if we want something that is going to be sustainable, that is actually going to work, then we need to constantly kind of rethink about whether things are working or not. So just to talk a bit about what happened in 2025. And, this was something that happened worldwide. Um, it wasn't just in one single country. It wasn't with one single organization going out of business. It kind of happened everywhere all at once. And wanting to acknowledge a bit of the kind of trauma that happened for everyone that was involved. What happens when you've got a funder that just abruptly cancels everything all at once, and there's not a lot of information, and how we went about managing that. Um, Something to keep in mind that was really unique in this situation was that the closeout happened in kind of like two big phases. One in which all of the implementers that were working with USA received a stop work order, which basically meant that you were to stop all programmatic activities and just kind of like suspend and hold in place. And then there was a second phase where all of the contracts and grants received actual terminations that basically told you that you were done and you had to like wrap up and close out as quick as humanly possible. And so there were essentially these two stages, but we didn't know that there were going to be these two stages. Initially, it was just stop, literally just stop, don't do anything. And so, there had to be a communication strategy. And having to tell everyone to stop all at once. It couldn't just be a game of telephone, right? Where, let's say the home office is calling a country office, and then the country office has, you know, 20 different grantee organizations. It has counterparts in, in perhaps like a Ministry of Health, if there are like all of the staff in that country. I mean, it was an immense number of people where we had to communicate this very ambiguous message, which is stop, hold on, don't do anything, and just kind of like wait. And this program suspension piece was very challenging because there was really incomplete information, and all of us are having to make decisions based on like very incomplete information. And so there were some very basic questions on, okay, so there are supposed to be these trainings that are happening next week, and we are flying in people, and travel activities have been paid, and a hotel has been booked, and okay, so who do we call first? Do we call everyone until we're canceling everything? Well, are we canceling, or are we just holding in place and we can do it in 3 weeks from now? Do we send people home? Okay, well, we send people home. Just because you send people home doesn't mean you can stop paying people, right? There are local labor laws regarding that. And so having to kind of figure out like what we had to do legally, and then also figuring out like what is even practical to do. And so it was, challenging trying to figure out what we had to stop doing, and then what would happen if we continued to stop paying people essentially. um, at some point we had to decide whether to close down particular projects, particular country offices, and then dealing with financial audits in lots of countries, because now you've closed down a program. And so just to say that there were lots of legal ramifications that needed to be dealt with. And then there was, when you close down all of your programs quickly, the kind of normal series of activities surrounding, capturing knowledge and evaluating your project and transferring your activities, all of those things kind of just had to get accelerated. And because it's not like we could just stop everything and just like run out the door. We still had to, produce annual reports, figure out, where we were going to transfer the activities to. In the programs where we were working directly with the government and providing technical assistance, specifically to some countries where we were working on some commercial law and mediation programs. Those programs that could be taken over by the government were much easier to kind of move forward and making sure that those activities would continue versus activities where we were working, providing assistance to civil society organizations working in democracy, a lot of those in Eastern Europe. Those, we didn't have the ability to ensure a sustainable outcome for those. And so it's just to say that it was very challenging, trying to really make sure that there would be some kind of sustainability for these programs. Um, and then maybe this is just my last slide is this is the lesson that I really learned personally, the very hard way, is that in closing out these projects, and if you want to do things, with care, is you cannot over communicate. And, you cannot, as rushed as everyone is, when you're closing down a project, you can't play a game of telephone. You can't tell, the someone, the country director, to then just try to like communicate the message to everyone. We had to, it was because everyone was in such denial that something like this could be possibly happening, people didn't believe it. And so, really having to make sure that the messages came from many directions, that there were, headquarter emails that were being sent out, and being make sure that we are like sending out this message in all the possible ways, whether it's through, very large conference calls, through email communications to actual physical letters that needed to be delivered to various, governments because to explain what was happening because it was so unbelievable. Um, so just thinking a bit about, communication methods, like how are you going to communicate this? Um, and then making sure that you communicate this in a very timely way because lots of things are happening at the same time, right? There was stop work orders and there was cancellations and things are very changing very quickly. And sometimes you have to get the communication out in an imperfect manner rather than wait and get everything squared away. um, Trying to be as transparent with everyone as much as possible. I think everyone initially is, concerned about their jobs, and not over promising things, but being clear about when we hear something, we will let you know, and we will let you know, the what the real deal is. Kind of being clear about what we're saying. And I think the most important thing here is maintaining trust because as soon as you break that trust, then everything else that I've talked about in terms of closing out projects is all over, right? So what is it that you can do to make sure that you maintain the trust with your grantees, with your communities, with your counterparts? And that you're communicating clearly to close out. Um, so I think Yael is going to put some folks into some breakout groups.
Well, not yet. We'll first hear from Yuval.
Yes, exactly. I was just gonna say, I was like, I will backtrack. Um, Go ahead. Sorry.
No, thank you so much for sharing all that. And it's just so unfortunate that you have to share about the crisis communication and the closure from your own experience and being one of the last ones left behind to deal with those last legal issues and cleaning up the mess. Sounds really challenging. So thank you for the work you did and for sharing your lessons from all of that. And now I will pass it on to you, Val, to hear a bit of a different kind of story, different perspective, but still meaningful and challenging um, about closing Project 10. Yuval? And
Yes.
then afterwards, I'll just share, we'll have questions, time for questions and answers, and then a bit of a discussion group before we close.
Thank you, Yael and Natasha. So, hello everyone. My name is Yuval. For now, I'm working in EWB Israel, Engineers Without Borders Israel, for almost a year. Before that, I worked in Project 10 for almost 3 years. I started as a regional director and then a general director. I replaced the general director 2 months before we closed the program, so you can imagine how was it for me to be the one to close it. So 10 was a volunteer organization, volunteer program. We had at our peak, in our peak, 10 centers around the world in developing countries. Most of our work was in education, and in the last 2 years of the organization, we also had health programs. And I'm the 10 is it's an organization by the Jewish Agency. So our volunteer came from Israel and also from the diaspora. So it was a Jewish organization, mostly from Israeli volunteers, but also from abroad. And this is why it's connected to the Jewish Agency, and it's important because you will understand why I'm saying that. The closure of 10 wasn't about a global problem. It was locally. After the 7th of October, it was very, very hard for 10 and I guess for other organizations in Israel to try to find the reason why they working abroad and not in Israel, and also to get funded from other factors. And basically because we were part of the Jewish Agency, so the decision to close the program wasn't because me wanted to close it. It was a decision that it was like behind our control. And when we get the decision of Jewish Agency to close it, it was too late to try to convince them why it's important not to do it, especially after the 7th of October. And we had like 1 week to be in panic, let's say, or in shock that we need to close, and then to think what to do. But basically because our program work in a way that it's not a volunteer organization, but it's not like we always changing places and volunteers come and go. We had centers more than a decade in the places that we located, and we work at the same place with the same community, with the same school, with the same people. So for us, it was very, very hard to imagine like how to close such a thing, because it's not just like a small activity that we did and we just don't send volunteers anymore. It's a process, and it's a whole working activity that we did with the community. So two things that like I did when I realized that we need to close. One is to understand how to close what we did in an ethical way, and also how to take not everything because it's impossible, but to take some of the things and try to hand over to another organization or another home for our activity. And this is how I get to be in EWB Israel. Michal also here, so she can say hi. But we worked very hard to maintain what was the strongest project that we had in 10. Of course, to do some adjustment and a lot of a company also from Olam and also from other partners in this Olam network. But it was one of the things that we did. But of course, I mean, we didn't take everything and we moved to EWB. It's impossible. So it was to concentrate on one project in Ghana that we moved to EWB, and the rest of the centers we decided to close. We didn't have a lot of time. We had, I mean, when they decided to close, they said, okay, you have 2 months and you need to wrap up everything and send in everyone homes. And it was a time that we had volunteers in the centers and directors, Israeli directors and coordinators and local staff and everything. So we thought of a way that to do it in an ethical way, as I said, also how to close it properly. Because we worked in the same place and we didn't move every couple of time or every project. So for us, all our way in our places is to be in touch with the people and to work together with the people and with the local staff. So if something like this happened, it's not like if we leave, so everything will fall apart or everything will is under our activity. It's not the end of the world, okay? Like they can continue live their life even without us being there, and this is what we trying to do in 10. It's like not changing their life. It's give them tools, give them skills, give them knowledge and experience, but it's not something that if we we live now, it's gonna change the whole world for them. So this is one, let's say, something that in every single minute that we worked in our centers, this is what we believed. And also because we worked very closely with the local staff and with the local community. So when we leave, we knew that that they have the experience and the exposure and the activities and all the details and information that they need to continue from the moment that we stopped. So this is one thing that we did, and it's not a decision that we took in the end. It's something that we had as ideologically all the way from day one. Second is the local staff that work with us, and we knew that at the moment that we will leave, they need to find a new job, they need to find themselves, they need to find what to do after a lot of years in Israeli program with foreigner volunteers, which is they found it very, very difficult to understand like what they will do next. So I hard very worked to get compensation for all the local staff for 2 months ahead, and also try to find new jobs in other organization or other places that we knew in the country that we work. What else I can say? So the decision to work with EWB, actually, I think it's one of the ethical thing to do, because we didn't close it 100%. We kept the strongest project that we had in Ghana, and as I said before, it's not exactly what we did with 10, but we took some of the things that we did in 10. We took some of the things that Engineers Without Borders doing generally, and this is how we get to a point that we have a new project that it's combination between two organizations. And a combination, it's the same community, the same local staff, and kind of the same concept that we had in 10, but a bit different because it's a new organization. And this is what I'm doing also now. Like I'm running the project in Ghana, in EWB. And not specifically now because I'm in maternity leave, but during this year. Let's see if I miss anything. Missing anything?
Thank you, Yuval. I want to go to Q&A and see if maybe
Amazing.
we have some questions, but we're a bit behind time. So thank you for sharing and for joining us during your maternity leave. And I'm glad that you're still able to do some of your work and join Engineers Without Borders. So I'm going to open it up for questions for either Natasha or Yuval. Feel free to just unmute yourself and ask. And or if you have your own experiences or questions about closing your own programs.
I have a question, Yuval, please. I'm Susan with Hands of Mothers. I'm based in the US, but our program is based in Rwanda, and I think we're looking at possibly closing down in a year. I don't think we'll be able to fund it beyond that. So what I'm hoping to do and working towards while continuing to try to raise money is to look at merging with a stronger program, because we have a partner in Rwanda and they're health-based. So, and we work on education and economic development. What did you do with the residual funds in your organization? Did you transfer them to EWB?
So yes, not all of them, but yes, but it was, I mean, it wasn't a decision that I took. I needed to, to convince the Jewish agency to, to let me take at least some of the funding that we had in 10, that it will move forward with me to the specifically project that I moved forward to, that I transferred to EWB. It's not like I I took all the funding and all the things that I can. So it was, and we didn't, and we can't use it for something else. It's specifically for this project. So
Program.
it's something that we managed to do. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Hi everyone. Thank you for this. This has been brilliant and very informative so far. My name is Abel. I'm with Olamid, which is a humanitarian aid agency. We're based out of Berlin, Germany. I actually wanted to ask basically to anybody who has any insights on this. Of course, this is the nature. We're also closing projects. Um, Basically from our side, what I wanted to ask is if the reason for the project closure is actually not financial, but it's based on a needs assessment and more or less also a strategic decision, while there is still an amount of need within that cohort and within that region, but we need to shift priorities, how would you actually communicate that to the beneficiaries of the project? That we're not shifting because it's, the nature of the business, but we're actually shifting because we need to prioritize another location, perhaps, while trying to maintain still trust in the organization. And we also build something of a community there. So we still want to be somewhat in contact, but we're no longer able to actually run the project there. So my question is more or less about transparency towards beneficiaries and where the line kind of tilts.
Natasha, do you want to take this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a rough one. And, like I said, in terms of transparency, I think you're always going to be better off explaining the real reason why. I mean, and what I mean by the real reason, is it because the funding priorities have changed, or is it because you've decided that the program is no longer effective? Or is it because that there are limited funds from the organization, and that it could be that we've decided to spend it in another way? I think there's oftentimes a first instinct to not tell the real truth, like, hey, sorry, like this program is not working, and so we have to do this. And somehow the truth always leaks out. This is like what I will always say. And so having to kind of explain that, and I think that when you explain like the real reasons, if you explain the real reasons, people are a lot more accepting, actually, of the message. Um, I think that we are going to see a lot more of this coming up ahead in terms of reprioritizing. I mean, yes, it's lack of funding, but it's actually, why are we doing this? Should we be spending money on this kind of activity? Is this the most appropriate use? Is it the most appropriate, are we the most appropriate people to be doing this? So there's going to be a lot of, I think, like rethinking of our programs in the next couple of months that I can see in 2026. So.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, so I'm gonna take us to our next activity, and I ask that you can if you please turn on your camera if you're able to, and we're just gonna have a quick breakout room discussion, 9-10 minutes, and I'm gonna share some questions. In the minute we have left, Natasha, do you want to share back like one idea that was brought up in your group?
Yeah, I think the one, I'll give you the optimistic one, which came from Michal, who really, I think, gave us an amazing story of, we assume that when we have to close out quickly, that things are ending, things are horrible, and then, what happens to the outcomes. And, she talked about how, when they went back to their program in Tigray and Ethiopia, the outcomes were maintained, and that, the projects, had, not continued in their original format, but, that things continued and that they were able to maintain some of those results. And I think we kind of assume that, things are ending, that, you're not going to be able to continue things, but it's not true. I mean, if you have good partnerships, you can have good, sustainability there.
That is good to hear, some best practices in action. And I'll share from my group that two things that stood out were, I think, Andrew, you said radical communication. So as Natasha was saying, just communicate from the highest level possible and in a human way. So really with empathy and not kind of in a corporate dry way. This is an emotional situation for everyone involved. So, and then Yuval was saying that even if you're in normal times, always plan as if you're in emergency time. So in scenario one, because you really just never know what can change at any time. So, budget ahead and just have a kind of crisis mitigation conversation and plan in your organization. Well, I hate to end on a sadder, setting note, but this is a reality we live in. And I just hope that everyone here, and I'm sure, is going to do the most thoughtful planning and implementation when thinking about closing your programs. Susan?
Do you have any plans for a follow-up to this session? 3 months, 6? I
Nothing
think it would be
specific.
great to have this as an ongoing topic, maybe 3 months or 6 months, and see how we're doing and what new challenges or opportunities people have identified.
So I'll definitely consider that. You're always welcome to be in touch with me or anyone at Olam to kind of have smaller conversations or us connecting you with specific people. But yeah, this is an important ongoing conversation that's relevant to many of our partners. But we will have this webinar and the slides, including Natasha's email, if you want to reach out to her and share back.
You can also bring me my email if someone want to.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah.
And so you can have these conversations with your team members and really, take time to think. And again, a reminder that we have funding through Olam in Motion and Aspire to allow you to have these conversations. And I should have done this earlier, but I'm going to just put in the chat like a 2-question feedback survey. If you could just click on the link and right now just fill it out, that would be great. And I will close it, but Natasha is you can stay for a few more minutes. I don't know if you can, Yuval, if anyone has a final
I can.
question or
I
two.
need to go. But thank you
So
so much.
thank you, Yuval. Thank you, Natasha. Thanks for everyone, and hope to see you soon.